Hi, I'm Paul Brodie. We're in my shop here. I'm sitting on Excelsior, Mitch behind the camera. We're going to do something on Excelsior. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about how I got involved in this crazy project in a way. In the early 2000s, I was working on other customers' bikes, antique motorcycles, and I noticed that often they would buy a motor for $5,000. They'd get me to build a frame, fork, handlebars, exhaust, whatever, and maybe I'd charge them maybe $10,000 for that back in those days. And then suddenly they had a bike worth $40,000, and I'm thinking, well, if I had a motor, maybe I could make a bit more money like that as well. So in 2005, I was coming back from the Davenport swap meet in Iowa, and I was with a customer. We were talking back and forth, and I came up with the idea of building a board tracker because a board tracker was worth more than a regular antique motorcycle. And at first we talked about a Cyclone, but there are about maybe 9 Cyclones in existence, and so I'd be stepping on some toes. But when it came to the Excelsior, there basically are no models which we know of in existence. So I really liked the look of the motor. It was huge, looked powerful. So I decided that I was going to build Excelsior board trackers. So that was early 2005. And at that point in my life, I was being sued by an ex and I needed to get some money. The house, the property values, I'm in the Vancouver area, more or less, a little bit outside, and the property values had started to rise quite significantly. So I went to the bank and I found out that if I got a mortgage on my property, I could get a pretty substantial line of credit. So that's what I did. And so in May of 2005, I did what I call a bit of financial recklessness. I turned away all my regular customers. I started living off my line of credit, and all I did 6 days a week, Monday to Saturday, was to work on Excelsiors from morning till night. On Sunday, I went trials riding. So that became my life, and there was kind of a freedom in that because I was doing exactly what I wanted. And if the Excelsior project needed something, a tool, parts, castings, I just spent the money. It was a good time. I like that. So we're going to do a couple slideshows. Now on a motorcycle, when you build a motorcycle, there's a lot of different things to think about. The frame, the gas tank, the handlebars, the wheels, suspension. But for these slideshows, we're just going to focus on the motor. So we're going to do slideshow today, and then we'll finish up the following episode on the motor. So with that all said, let's get going. I had 5 old photos that I found, and this was probably the best photo. The other ones, there was 3 of them that weren't so good at all. But this is Joe Walters. He was part of the Excelsior racing team, and I like this shot. So in April of 2005, I did a full-scale drawing. I knew how large the wheels and the tires were, so I based it on those sizes. I did a full-scale drawing, and this is the full-scale drawing of the motor. I had no idea what went inside the cases or how that would work out. I'm just going for the outside shape right now. I managed to find through a friend a set of old Excelsior cases. This is off the street version, and you can see the inside. It looks like it's been underwater a little bit there. This is the outside. So on the overhead cam motor, it didn't have any of this, and this part here was all different as well. On the bottom of the cases, it definitely looked like it had been sitting in the ground or something. There was a lot of corrosion, so this area had to get rebuilt, but that was fine because this motor would never ever run. It was just for show and the sizes. Here's the start. This is what I did. I set up the cases on my mill. I got an end mill right here, and I started to remove some metal. You can see how it's coming off. I'm about halfway down here, making a few chips. And then what I did is I cut out a 1/4-inch plate. That was the size, I thought, of the bevel chest. This is what holds all the gears, which drives the cam and the magneto. And I glued it on. So I have started making a mock-up motor. I wanted some cylinders to put on it, so I grabbed some 6061. This is solid. This is just for mock-up. You can see how I've got a little bit of a bore, but that only goes down maybe 1/2 inch or so. So I cut the fins, and this is the end mill now, and I squared off the base. This is on the mill in the rotary table. That's the rotary table. That is the chuck. A little bit later on, this was my desk in the shop, and I spent 4 months sitting in front of the computer. This is a 486 computer. I did buy a new flat screen for it, and on the computer I had AutoCAD version number 12. So old software, but that's where I figured out what the motor looked like inside. I spent 4 months in that chair looking at manuals, metallurgy books, seals, bearing manuals. On that computer, I've started to draw what the cylinders look like. You can see here I've got the included valve angle, and this is the magneto here, and this is the drive for the magneto. So you can see how the drive comes off a little bit above the crank. Not exactly on the crank because the gears have to drive. You need space there. This is a more detailed shot, and the angle is 47.5, I discovered. So these gears here, these 3 gears have to be custom made because you can't buy any gears that are that angle at all. This is the bevel drive I came up with, and I just talked about the gears, 47.5, so I made some mock-up gears out of aluminum solid because I wanted to see what the clearance was in between the gears. I wanted to see if my calculations were correct, and they seem to be correct, so I went with those numbers. This is the bevel case a little bit later on, and you can see how it's built up from the 1/4-inch plate, a plate. And I have a hole for the bearing. I have a hole so that it can breathe. And it's starting to take shape. This is the bevel drive module, which is held into that case now. So there's 4 Allen screws holding it down. This is going to drive the magneto. This is the front cylinder. This is the rear cylinder. And you can see how the gear is raised up a little bit above the center line of the crank. This is the outside case of the bevel drive. And what I did is to weld on some mesh, and then I covered it with Bondo, and I worked on the shape because having the shape was a crucial part of having the bike look right. So here's the bottom part of the bevel drive. I've got the cylinders on now. You can see the 4 bolts on each one. There's the magneto, and this is the drive for the magneto. So it's coming together. This is the upper bevel drive, and it took a while to figure this out. So what I've got here is I got some shapes made out of aluminum. I've taken glue, and I have glued them together, and I'm working on the shape. I've filled in the spaces with some Bondo. You can see that, and ultimately I made 4 different shapes before I was happy with this. These ones were too short. This area from here to here I decided was too short, so I changed that. That's what it looks like when I've put more Bondo on and I've sanded it down, so you can see the final shape that's coming together. I haven't started working on the heads yet or the cam towers or anything, but this is the bevel drive. This is the lower part. These are the tubes that hold the bevel shafts inside. It's not push rods, and this is the upper bevel drive here. That's the magneto drive. Finally, this is what I got from the foundry. This was the final shape, and I was quite happy with it. And it needed a little bit of machining. So I made up a lot of fixtures for all different parts. When you're working with a casting, you can't just hold it in a chuck. You always got to make it seem some kind of a fixture. So here is a fixture. I've got a counterweight right here, and what I've done here is I've faced it, and now I have to bore it for the bearing, because there's a couple bearings in each of these upper bevel drives. And that's what it looks like. That's the finished product when it's all sanded and polished, and I think they look quite smart. I spent quite a bit of time working on what the left side of the motor would look like, because I didn't have any photos of the left side of the motor. And I talked to someone on the phone, and he had an older Excelsior motor, not an overhead cam. And he told me that he would never take this thing to shows anymore because he didn't want anyone taking photographs of it. And I thought, well, that's kind of crazy. But it seems like some owners of this old antique machinery, they don't want to share anything. And so I asked him if he'd send me a photo, and he wouldn't send me a photo because he said, I know what you're doing, and I don't think it's a good idea to make a replica of something, even if they don't exist. So I came up with this heavy-duty webbing here, basically on my own, and I like the looks of it because I think it kind of matched the rest of the bike, of the motor. I spent quite a bit of money at the pattern makers. I did my CNC drawings, and this is some of the patterns which I got. This is so that I could take it to the foundry and have the castings made. And having the patterns made, this was back in 2006. I spent $45,000 getting patterns made, and you can see here, this is for the left side. Here's those webs I was talking about, and this is what goes inside of this, so that you end up with the right size and thickness of the walls. I used about a 3/8 wall for this. I wanted it to be strong. So this is the patterns. More patterns. Unfortunately, what happened with the patterns is I got the castings made, and that was at a foundry in Burnaby, and I should have gone there and picked up the patterns, but I was busy. It was kind of on my mind, but not in the forefront. And then the foundry had a fire that I heard about a year or two later, and when I went there was nothing left and my patterns were gone. So all that money I spent, I do not have the patterns. This is a pretty happy day. I got back from the foundry. This is a whole bunch of engine parts. I think I got 17, enough to build 17 motors. You can see all the crankcases here, and these are all, there's bevel drives, these are cam towers, and that. These are the pieces. So you got the right side case, left side. This is the bevel drive that fits on there. These are the cam towers. All the cam towers get made off the same casting, and these are for the magneto drive. I needed to make an oil pump, so I went on my AutoCAD and I designed an oil pump, and it got made by Southern Cross. Leon, he does nice work. He also did the crankcases, and I thought that the oil pumps worked out really well. But what I didn't realize until we started up the motor much later, that the oil pump was actually running backwards. So I had designed it wrong. I thought the oil went in between the gears, but it goes around the gears. So there went $5,000. Those became paperweights, and I gave them away to friends. This is what the oil pump looks like inside. You can see how it's pretty simple. Well, this is the old one. Those are the gears. So it's actually three-piece. There's the inlet, and there's the return, and the middle plate that goes in between those two. And this is what the version 2 oil pump looks like. It's different. This comes around a lot more because everything had to connect so that the pump went the other way. That was a big learning experience for me. That's where the oil pump sits. It sits at the bottom of the bevel chest. I call this is the bevel chest. and the oil pump sits at the bottom. It's held in with a couple Allen screws. Old piston, that's 1919 approximately, and this is the new piston I got. It's a JE piston made in California. You can see the difference. This one is made out of cast iron. This is aluminum. Look at the thickness of the rings. These are much narrower and thinner rings. So engine design, a lot has happened in 100 years for sure. These are the flywheels. This is an Excelsior flywheel from back in the day. You can see it's larger. This is the flywheels I got. It's Truett and Osborne. They're a aftermarket Harley company down in the US, and they made up custom flywheels for me because they had a shorter stroke than stock. Usually this hole is up here more, but I got a bunch made that were custom. This is Excelsior rods. These are Carrillo rods. These are not cheap, but they're beautifully made. It's called a knife and fork. You see how this is the knife? It goes inside the fork. You know, some of the V-twins, like a Vincent, the rods go side by side, but not these ones. These ones are in line with each other. This is a couple sets of flywheels that I've used on Excelsiors, and you can see the holes which were used to balance here. We're going to do a video in the next little while, and I'm going to show you how to balance a flywheel. That's what the flywheels look like with the Carrillo rods in it. It's a nice looking flywheel. I had to get the shafts all custom made as well, the sprocket shaft and the pinion shaft, because I couldn't find anything stock that would work. And here's the motor. I've been working on the crankcases, the bevel drive, upper bevel drive, the cam tires, but you notice that I've got spaces where the heads go. And that's because the heads took a lot longer than anything else. That's a whole nother story. And so I'm gonna tell you that story next episode. That'll be part 2 of this little series. We hope you have enjoyed learning a little bit about Excelsior motors and how I made these motors here. So thank you for watching. Mitch and I like coffees. If you buy us some coffees, much appreciated. If you like the video, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe. Take care. See you next episode. Stay safe.